I think the first time I really felt like I had to start proving myself is when I started playing sports. Because in sports, you want to be the best and you have to prove it. There's a scoreboard, there's a lineup, there's rankings, and everything is measurable, even if it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. Everything is performance and everything is valued around that performance. For a long time, my own self value came from that same performance. Sports have a way of doing that to a lot of people, and if you've played sports, I'm sure you probably understand where I'm coming from. I grew up going to a very small school, but even though it was small, I was constantly playing in environments where you realize something very fast. There are always bigger fish in the sea. Whether it was with my club soccer team, which combined kids from a couple schools when I was in middle school, or it was the Olympic Development Program, which were the best kids from Idaho, or the regional ODP, which were the best kids from the Western United States, or the high school team, where you're then competing against kids from all four grades, or going to college combines, where you have the best kids from all over the nation. Every time you step into a new environment, you realize the competition level is rising and rising, and there's not really a roof on that at all. And my journey through that looked like what a lot of athletes actually go through. I went from being a bench player to getting some minutes to eventually starting and then becoming a captain. And that happened for club, that happened for high school, that happened for my teams building up to that. It's just a process that a lot of athletes will understand. But every step of that journey came with its own underlying feeling of you have to prove you deserve to be here. And that belief didn't just come from sports, it came from growing up as well. Growing up on the farm, there wasn't really a difference between the kids' jobs and the adult jobs. There were times where the kid maybe wouldn't be doing as much as the adults would, but really from a very young age, we were getting taught how to do the things that the adults were already doing. And when you grow up in that environment, you learn something pretty quick. And if it's that if you don't show up and you don't do your job, that things don't get done and they start falling apart. So between sports and farm life, I developed the mindset that performance was everything from a very, very young age. You prove your value by showing up. You prove your value by working hard, and you prove your value by doing your job. In a lot of ways, that mindset built a lot of good things in me. It built things like discipline, built drive, and it built work ethic. But it also planted a belief that took me a long time to recognize. And that belief was that if I'm not performing, then I don't matter. So, growing up between sports and the farm, I learned something very early: show up, do your job, and perform. And that was just the expectation. That's how it was every day. On the farm, if animals need to be fed, you feed them. If something needed to be fixed, you fixed it. And if work needed to be done, you did it. There wasn't really a difference there. You just showed up and handled your responsibility whether you wanted to or not. And sports reinforced that same mindset. If you wanted to play, you had to perform. If you wanted minutes, you had to earn them. And if you wanted respect, you had to prove it. You couldn't just show up and have everything fall into your lap. And honestly, that mind that mindset has been amazing for me, and it's built a lot of good things. But there's also a pretty big hidden cost with when performance becomes your identity. Because when performance becomes your identity, failure stops feeling like feedback, and failure starts feeling like you are the one failing, not the situation. And always sports has a way of building that belief slowly, and it always does. You might start out as one of the better players in your town, and then you step into your club soccer where it combines a few, and then you work on it and maybe you build up, but then you step into ODP and it's the state, and then you step into combines and it's the country, and then you step into college or the professional tryouts and it's a global thing. And every time you level up, you realize that the game is also leveling up with you. There's always someone that's going to be bigger. There's always someone that's going to be faster. There's always someone that's going to be stronger. And there's always someone that might be a little more skilled at what they're doing. And when you step into these environments, the pressure starts to build, and it builds very quickly, because suddenly the game doesn't just feel like a game anymore. It feels like a test of whether you belong. And I remember when that pressure hit me harder than I had ever expected. It was when I first got out to college. I had just moved away from everything I knew. I was in a completely different part of the United States. I had dropped everything essentially. I moved away. I had a new team. I had new coaches, new teammates, and a lot of very new expectations that coaches had for me, players had for me, and expectations that I had for myself. And on top of all of that, I had just come off of one of the worst injuries that I had in my career. And right away, I realized that my mentality was everything. I already felt like I had something to prove, and I felt like I needed to show everyone that I deserved to be there, whether it was the people believing in me or the people that didn't believe in me. I had something to prove. So I got out there and the season started, and right away I realized that this was a completely different environment than I was used to. Like I said, I had moved away, and the biggest shock for me up front was definitely the weather. I moved from Idaho to Nebraska, and Idaho has hot days, but nothing like Nebraska. It was hot, it was humid, the air felt very heavy, and if you've ever been in humidity and trained in humidity, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Every sprint that you do feels harder. Every breath that you take feels harder, and your legs get heavy way faster, especially when you're out there on turf in the humidity and it's 120 degrees. You want to die. You want to roll over and give up and never go back to it. So the preseason practices especially were very brutal. At the beginning of August, end of July, everyone was exhausted, everyone was out there grinding, and everyone was trying to survive those sessions. And while everyone was there trying to adjust physically, I was also struggling mentally as well, because I wasn't playing like myself. I wasn't scoring goals. I was messing up simple things that usually came easy to me. Touches I should have controlled, passes I should have completed, little mistakes that kept stacking up and stacking up. And once you start focusing on those mistakes, it just builds and builds and builds. And when you're already feeling pressure to prove yourself, those mistakes feel even bigger, especially once they start stacking up. Every time you mess up, you start thinking to yourself, that shouldn't have happened. Why did I do that? Obviously, the coach saw that. Now I don't look like I belong here. What am I doing? And once that happens and once those thoughts creep in, it starts messing with your confidence a lot. You start overthinking everything from your passes to your running to your decisions to your touches. And instead of playing and having fun and enjoying it, you start playing careful to avoid those risks or decisions. And then within the first 2 weeks of preseason, I got benched. I wasn't in the starting lineup where I felt like I could have been and I felt like I should have been, but at the same time, I didn't think in my own mind that I deserved it. And when that first game came and I wasn't in that starting lineup, it hit me pretty hard, because when you tie your identity to performance, moments like that don't just feel like they're a part of the game, they feel very personal. You start asking questions like, do I even belong here? Did they make a mistake bringing me here? And am I even good enough to be playing at this level? The hardest part about the moments like this is that they don't just challenge your performance, they also challenge how you actually see yourself. Because if you've spent years believing that your value comes from performing, then the moment that your performance drops or isn't where you feel like it should be, that means that your value drops as well. That's what it feels like. And that's the trap that a lot of high performers fall into. We become really good at what we do, we work hard, we push ourselves, and we start to achieve things. But underneath all of that is the quiet belief that we rarely talk about, and it's the belief that says, if I'm performing, I matter. If I'm not performing, maybe I don't matter. And when you live your life with that belief long enough, you start chasing validation instead of chasing growth. Every game becomes a test. Every practice becomes proof. Every mistake feels like evidence that you are not enough. And the crazy thing is, a lot of athletes go through moments like this, moments where confidence drops, moments where performance dips, and moments where you question your belonging. But honestly, we rarely talk about it as athletes because in sports, you're supposed to be tough. You're supposed to push through it and you're supposed to act like nothing's wrong because that's how it is. You can't show that emotion if you're trying to get to the next level. But internally, these moments can really shake your identity. And when performance becomes your identity, every bad game feels like a personal crisis. And when that happened, it hit me hard because when your identity is tied to the performance, moments like that don't just feel like they're another part of the game. They feel very personal, and it makes you fall back into that trap of asking yourself those types of questions. Do I belong here? What am I doing? Am I even good enough? But the way that I responded to that was by doing something that I have always done and that I learned from a very young age. It was train harder, work harder, put in extra work, and keep doing it day after day. More touches, more reps, more time after practice. I just doubled down on trying to get better. But something else happened during that time that I didn't expect. I found a group of friends who liked me for me, not for what I was doing. Not because I was scoring goals, not because of my performance, just because of who I was. And that was a really important moment for me, and I think that was a really big piece to the puzzle as well, because it showed me something that I had never really experienced before, and it was that my value didn't only exist when I was performing, and that people could actually appreciate me for who I was, not just what I did or what I could do for them. And that planted the first seed in realizing what would take years for me to actually fully understand that maybe performance shouldn't determine your whole worth. So that experience started planting a question in my mind. If worth isn't supposed to come from performance, then where does it come from? Because the truth is, the performance mindset doesn't stay just on the field. It follows you into everything else that you do in life. Athletes just experience it maybe a little earlier because sports is very clear and very obvious about it. There's a scoreboard, starting lineup, there's statistics, there's shots, there's tackles, there's turnovers, and you can literally measure every single thing you do on the field every single day. But once sports ends and the scoreboard is gone, that mindset is still there and that scoreboard is still there. It just becomes less obvious. And it starts showing up in other areas of our lives. For a lot of people, performance becomes productivity. You start measuring your value based on how much you accomplish, how busy you are, how much money you make, and how many things you get done. You have a productive day and you feel confident, you feel valuable, you feel like you're doing something right. But if you have a slow week or things aren't going well, the same voice creeps back into your mind. What am I doing wrong? Why am I behind? Why am I not where I should be? Because your mind is still running the same equation you learned many, many years ago. If I don't produce, I don't matter, but if I do produce, I do matter. And the problem with that mindset is it never lets you feel settled because performance is always fluctuating. You're always going to have your ups and you're always going to have your downs. As high performers, we're wired to chase the next level. We hit a goal and then we immediately start looking for the next one. We win a game and we're already thinking about our next opponent. We hit a milestone and we start comparing ourselves to everybody else's milestones. So instead of feeling satisfied, you end up living on what I like to call the achievement treadmill. You're always running, you're always chasing, you're always proving, but the finish line we never get to the finish line. The finish line is moving as we are moving as well. And something else happens when performance becomes identity as well, and it's you start comparing yourself to everyone else. Not just in sports, but in life. You compare your careers, you compare your progress, you compare your income, and you compare your achievements. And when you live in comparison, and you live in that comparison mindset long enough, it starts distorting how you see yourself and how you see others. Because no matter how far you've come, there's always someone that's ahead of you. And if your worth is tied to being ahead, then you will always feel behind no matter how much you are doing. And honestly, sometimes that belief can even shift into relationships. People start believing that they have to earn the love. They feel like they need to provide enough. They have to achieve more. They have to be strong and they have to be useful enough. Like their value in the relationship comes from what they are bringing to the table instead of believing that they're valuable simply because of who they are. And that can make a relationship feel like it's just another performance too. And eventually that mindset creates something that a lot of people experience but don't talk about. And it's burnout. Not just physical burnout, but identity burnout. Because if your identity is built entirely on performance, then there's never really a moment where you feel like you're enough. You hit one goal and you instantly feel the pressure to hit the next. You achieve something and you feel the pressure to maintain that achievement. And if your performance drops for a while, so does your confidence, and your identity starts to shake and wobble. Your sense of self-worth starts to go down. And that's when people start asking a deeper question. If performance has been defining me my whole life, what happens when performance slows down? What happens when I fail? What happens when I struggle? Who am I then? Because eventually the scoreboard disappears. Seasons end, careers change, and life shifts. And if performance was the only thing that was defining you, that moment feels like you're losing your whole identity. So if you're listening to this right now and you feel like your worth is tied to performance, I want you to ask yourself one question. Who are you performing for? Because that question will tell you a lot about what's really going on. Are you performing for approval? Are you performing for validation or for recognition? Are you performing because it reflects who you truly are? Sometimes just asking that question starts to reveal where the pressure is actually coming from. One simple action you can take today to start separating identity from performance is to literally just separate them. Write down your values. Write down the things that define you when you are not performing and the things that are true about you whether you win or you lose. Because those things are your real identity, not the performance itself. And the next time that you fail or things don't go your way, stop asking yourself the question that most people ask. Stop asking, why am I not good enough? Instead, ask yourself, what can I improve tomorrow? Because improvements keep you moving forward. Failure only becomes permanent when you stop learning from it. If your struggle is tied to performance, ask yourself, what can you do to improve? But if your struggle is tied to life, realize something important. You are enough. Every single one of us has things that we can improve, from the most important, highest up person in the world to the person that maybe nobody knows about. Everybody has something that they can improve. But life isn't against everybody else. It's a race against yourself. And this is where one of my favorite principles that I'm talked a ton about and I'm going to keep repeating over and over again, and it's the action framework. Acknowledge, confront, take ownership, interrupt, operate, and act. So you need to acknowledge what is happening. Then after you acknowledge that, you confront the belief that has been holding you back. Then you will take ownership of where you are. You will interrupt those negative patterns or thoughts that you've been having. You will operate with better habits, find what habits need to be fixed, and operate better on those. And then you are going to act. And especially for athletes, the scoreboard defines us for a long time. But the score isn't who you are. The score is just how the game played out in that amount of time. There are always lessons, there are always wins, and there are always going to be losses. So here's the challenge that I want to leave with you today. Before you go to bed tonight, ask yourself just one simple question. Who am I when I'm all alone and nobody is watching? When you answer that question, write down the characteristics you see, both good and bad, because that right there, that's your real identity. And remember this, your identity is not built on your best performances. Your identity is built on your worst nights because your worst nights reveal who you choose to be when things are the hardest. And that's where the real strength is built. Remember, the world doesn't need the perfect you, it needs the real you showing up and fighting.